The billionaire's son kept crying in the restaurant, until a black waitress softly said, "He just needs a mom." What if the one thing money couldn't buy was the only thing that could stop a child's tears? Marcus Ashford had everything: a penthouse overlooking the city, a private jet, endless zeros in his bank account. Yet there he sat in the corner booth of the finest restaurant in Philadelphia, helpless as his 3-year-old son, Owen, wailed inconsolably. The crystal chandeliers overhead seemed to mock him with their cold brilliance. Other diners glanced over, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed annoyance. Marcus had tried everything: the expensive toy he'd bought that morning, promises of ice cream, even threats he knew he'd never follow through on. Nothing worked. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for Owen again, only to have the boy twist away, his small face red and streaked with tears. Then a soft voice cut through the chaos, gentle as a lullaby. "He just needs a mom." Marcus looked up to see a young black waitress standing beside their table, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness that somehow understood everything. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The waitress's name tag read Amara, and she couldn't have been more than 30, with kind eyes that seemed to hold stories she was too young to have lived. She didn't wait for Marcus's permission before sliding into the booth beside Owen, her movements smooth and unhurried. The little boy's crying didn't stop immediately, but it changed, became less frantic, more like the exhausted sobs of someone who'd been fighting too long. Marcus sat frozen, his carefully constructed walls suddenly feeling paper-thin. He'd built an empire in commercial real estate, had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, could read a room of sharks and come out on top every time. But this moment, watching a stranger comfort his son with such natural ease, left him completely undone. "I'm sorry," he finally managed, his voice rougher than intended. "He's been like this all day. I don't know what." He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without revealing too much to a stranger. Amara glanced at him briefly, then returned her attention to Owen. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I bet you're just so tired, aren't you? All those big feelings are exhausting." Her hand moved in gentle circles on the boy's back, a motion so instinctive it made Marcus's chest ache. Owen hiccuped, his crying slowing to shuddering breaths. He looked at Amara with wide, tear-filled blue eyes, the same eyes his mother had. Marcus had to look away. It had been 8 months since the accident. 8 months since Rebecca's car had hydroplaned on a rain-slicked highway, since the police had shown up at his office with faces that told him everything before they spoke a word. 8 months of trying to be both parents to a confused toddler who kept asking when mommy was coming home, until he'd finally stopped asking at all. "I can bring him some warm milk," Amara offered, still speaking in that soothing tone. "And maybe some of Cook's apple cobbler? We keep it warm in the back. It's not on the menu, but it's what I'd want if I were feeling sad." "You don't have to," Marcus started, but she was already standing, smoothly lifting Owen with her. The boy didn't protest, just laid his head against her shoulder with a trust that should have taken weeks to build. "I have a little brother about his age," Amara said, catching Marcus's alarmed expression. "I'll just take him to the kitchen for a minute, let him see where the magic happens. Sometimes kids just need a change of scenery. Is that okay?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched them disappear through the swinging kitchen doors, his son's small hand clutching the fabric of Amara's uniform. For the first time in 8 months, Owen had gone willingly with someone other than him or Rebecca's mother. He sat alone at the table, surrounded by the quiet murmur of other diners' conversations, the gentle clink of silverware on fine china. His barely touched filet mignon had gone cold. He'd brought Owen here because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday had always been their family dinner night. Rebecca had insisted on it, one night a week, no matter how busy they were, when they'd dress up and go somewhere nice, just the 3 of them. He'd kept the tradition going because letting it die felt like letting another piece of her slip away. But maybe that had been selfish. Maybe Owen needed more than expensive restaurants and desperate attempts to maintain routines from a life that no longer existed. Maybe his son needed something Marcus had no idea how to give him anymore. When Amara returned 10 minutes later with a smiling, milk-mustached Owen in her arms, Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. something he'd been holding tightly closed since the funeral. Owen settled back into the booth with his cobbler, eating with the focused concentration only small children can manage. Amara didn't leave. Instead, she slid into the seat across from Marcus, and something in her expression told him she understood far more than he'd revealed. "My mama died when I was 12, she said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on the white tablecloth. Breast cancer. Took her fast, 6 months from diagnosis to gone. My baby brother, Elijah, was only 2. He didn't understand why she wasn't there anymore, why Dad couldn't stop crying long enough to make breakfast or remember to pick him up from daycare." She paused, watching Owen savor each spoonful of cobbler like it was medicine. "He cried for 6 months straight. Nothing helped until my grandma came to stay with us. She said some pain is so big, it needs to be witnessed by someone who gets it." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crumble. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I've tried everything, hired the best nannies, bought every toy, read all the books about grief and children. But nothing works. He wakes up screaming every night. He won't let anyone else touch him, won't go to daycare anymore. And his voice broke. "I don't know how to be enough for him when I can barely get myself out of bed most mornings." Amara's eyes glistened with understanding. "You're not supposed to be enough by yourself. That's the lie we tell ourselves, that we should be able to handle everything alone, especially if we're strong enough or successful enough or have enough resources." She glanced at Owen, who'd started to yawn between bites. "But kids don't need perfect. They need real. They need someone who'll sit in the mess with them and admit when it's hard." The restaurant had grown quieter now, most diners finishing their meals. Marcus noticed their server hovering uncertainly near the kitchen, clearly unsure whether to interrupt whatever was happening at table 12. He should have felt embarrassed, Marcus Ashford, the Marcus Ashford, falling apart in public. Instead, he felt something close to relief. "She was driving to pick up his birthday cake," Marcus said suddenly, the words he'd never spoken aloud finally finding their way out. "Rebecca." It was going to be shaped like a fire truck because Owen was obsessed with them. She'd ordered it from this special bakery an hour away because nowhere closer could get the details right. "And I'd told her." He stopped, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "I told her it didn't matter, that Owen wouldn't remember anyway, that she didn't need to drive in the rain. But she went anyway because she wanted everything to be perfect for him." If this moment touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Amara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Mr. Ashford, can I tell you something that might sound strange?" Her voice had taken on an urgent quality. "I think Owen and I were meant to meet tonight. Because what I'm about to tell you might be the only thing that can help you both." But before she could continue, Owen's head drooped forward, and he was asleep, just like that, mid-bite, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. And in that moment of sudden quiet, Marcus realized he was about to hear something that would change everything. Amara gently lifted Owen from his seat, cradling him with practiced ease. "There's a private room in the back," she whispered. "The owner's office. He's my uncle, and he won't mind. Let's get him somewhere more comfortable." Marcus followed her through the restaurant, aware of the curious glances but no longer caring. The office was small but warm, with a leather couch where Amara laid Owen down, covering him with her cardigan. When they stepped back into the hallway, leaving the door cracked so they could hear if Owen woke, Amara turned to face Marcus directly. "I don't usually do this," she began, her voice low and intense. "I don't share my business with customers, and I certainly don't get involved in their lives. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." She took a breath. "After my mama died, my daddy tried to do exactly what you're doing. Throw money at the problem, hire people, maintain routines, pretend everything was normal. He never dealt with his grief because he thought being strong meant not breaking down. And you know what happened." Marcus waited, his heart pounding. Elijah stopped talking. Completely. For almost a year. The doctors said it was selective mutism, triggered by trauma. But really, it was because Dad never gave him permission to be sad, never showed him it was okay to fall apart. My brother saw Dad walking around like a robot, going through the motions, and he thought that's what he was supposed to do too. Except he was two. He didn't have the words for what he was feeling, so he just stopped using words altogether. The hallway suddenly felt too small. Marcus leaned against the wall, his breath coming shorter. "What fixed it?" he asked hoarsely. "What brought him back?" "My grandma made Dad go to therapy. Forced him, actually. Threatened to call child services if he didn't get help. And the therapist told him something that saved our family." Amara's eyes locked onto his. She said grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry differently. And children can't learn to carry it if they never see the adults in their lives picking it up in the first place. Marcus felt something inside him break wide open. "I haven't cried," he whispered. "Not once. Not at the funeral, not when I packed up her clothes, not when I had to explain to Owen that Mommy was in heaven. I just kept moving, kept working, kept trying to hold everything together because if I stopped," his voice cracked. "If I stopped, I was afraid I'd never start again." Amara stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Ashford, your son isn't crying because something's wrong with him. He's crying because he's the only one in the house who's allowed to. He's carrying all the grief for both of you, and it's drowning him." The truth of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his hands covering his face. "I don't know how to do this," he repeated, but this time the words came out broken, honest, desperate. Have you ever faced a loss that felt too big to carry alone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes just naming our pain can help us begin to heal. From inside the office, Owen stirred and called out softly, "Daddy!" It was the first time in weeks he'd sounded like a child instead of someone lost. Marcus looked up at Amara through blurred vision. "Will you help me?" he asked. "Please. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can't keep doing it alone." Amara extended her hand to help him up. "That's the first step," she said. "Admitting you need help. Everything else, we can figure out together." Over the next 2 weeks, Amara became an unexpected constant in Marcus and Owen's life. It started with her giving Marcus the name of the therapist who'd helped her family, a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in childhood grief. The first session had been brutal, sitting across from Dr. Chen while she'd asked him to describe the day Rebecca died, to say out loud all the things he'd been running from. He'd broken down completely, sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe, while Owen watched from where he'd been playing with blocks in the corner. But Dr. Chen had done something unexpected. She'd called Owen over and said, "See? Daddy's sad too. Just like you. It's okay to be sad about Mommy." And Owen, sweet Owen, had climbed into Marcus's lap and pressed his small hands to his father's wet cheeks and said, "It's okay, Daddy. You can cry." That had been the turning point. The moment Marcus stopped pretending to be invincible and started being human again in front of his son. Amara had offered to watch Owen during Marcus's therapy sessions. She'd refused payment at first. "This isn't a job," she'd insisted, but Marcus had convinced her by explaining that her presence gave Owen stability, gave him someone who understood loss but wasn't drowning in it. She'd bring Elijah along sometimes, and the two boys would play while she and Marcus talked in the kitchen, cups of coffee growing cold between them as he learned how to speak about Rebecca without his throat closing up. She taught him small things that made enormous differences. How to create a memory box with Owen, filling it with photos and Rebecca's favorite scarf, things they could look at together when missing her felt overwhelming. How to establish new routines instead of clinging desperately to old ones. How to say, "I miss Mommy too," instead of deflecting with promises of toys or treats. One evening, Marcus found himself sitting on Owen's bedroom floor, the memory box open between them. Owen held Rebecca's scarf, rubbing the soft fabric against his cheek. "Mommy smelled like flowers," he said quietly. "She did," Marcus agreed, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "She wore jasmine perfume." Every morning, right before she'd leave for work, she'd kiss your forehead and leave a little bit of that smell behind. Owen looked at him with those two knowing eyes. I forget sometimes what her voice sounded like. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands and played a video he'd been too afraid to watch for 8 months. Rebecca laughing, spinning Owen around the living room, both of them giggling wildly. Birthday boy, she sang out. My beautiful birthday boy. Owen watched, transfixed, tears streaming down his face. But this time, the tears weren't born of confusion or fear. They were the tears of remembering, of missing someone precious, of love that wouldn't die even when the person did. Marcus held his son as they cried together, really together, for the first time since the accident. If you've been moved by Marcus and Owen's journey, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories about healing, hope, and the unexpected connections that change our lives. Later that night, after Owen had finally fallen asleep, peacefully, without nightmares, Marcus texted Amara. I don't know how to thank you. Her response came quickly. You just did. Tomorrow, bring Owen by the restaurant. Uncle Joe wants to teach him how to make apple cobbler. Some traditions are worth keeping. Some are worth building new. 3 months later, the change in Owen was remarkable but gradual, the way all real healing happens. He'd started talking again. Really talking, not just the functional words of daily life but the deeper things that lived in his small heart. He spoke about missing his mother, about happy memories, about being scared sometimes that he'd forget her completely. And Marcus had learned to hold space for all of it, to sit with the discomfort instead of trying to fix or distract or buy his way out of grief. They'd started a new Tuesday tradition. Instead of fancy restaurants where they sat quietly and pretended, they went to Amara's uncle's restaurant and helped in the kitchen. Owen wore a tiny chef's hat that Uncle Joe had ordered special, and he'd stand on a step stool mixing ingredients, measuring carefully, learning that creating something with your hands could be its own kind of therapy. Amara worked most Tuesday nights, and she'd check on them between tables, stealing moments to ruffle Owen's hair or share a knowing smile with Marcus. Dr. Chen had helped Marcus understand that moving forward didn't mean leaving Rebecca behind. It meant learning to carry her memory differently, as a foundation rather than a weight, as love rather than loss. He'd started the Rebecca Ashford Foundation, funding grief support programs for children and families. Owen helped sometimes, drawing pictures for the brochures. His artwork transformed from dark scribbles to bright splashes of color as the months passed. Marcus had also made changes in his own life. He'd stepped back from the 60-hour workweeks, hired a CEO to handle day-to-day operations, restructured his priorities around being present for Owen. Money, he'd learned, couldn't buy the thing his son needed most: his full, authentic, imperfect presence. One Tuesday evening, as Owen carefully piped frosting onto cupcakes under Uncle Joe's patient guidance, Amara joined Marcus at a corner table. He's doing so much better, she observed, her eyes warm. Thanks to you, Marcus said. I mean it, Amara. You saved us. You saw what we needed before I even knew how to ask for it. She shook her head. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did the hard work. You showed up for your pain, for his pain. You got vulnerable. That takes real courage. Marcus thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, armored, desperate, drowning. I was so afraid that if I let myself feel it, I'd fall apart and never recover. But you did fall apart, Amara said gently. And you recovered anyway. That's the thing about breaking. Sometimes it's the only way to rebuild something stronger. From the kitchen, Owen's laughter rang out, pure and unreserved, as Uncle Joe pretended to steal a taste of frosting and got caught red-handed. The sound filled the restaurant like music, like hope, like proof that joy could coexist with loss. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, but they were different now. Not the tears of someone drowning, but of someone learning to swim. Rebecca would have liked you, he said softly. She would have appreciated that you showed up for us when we needed it most. Amara squeezed his hand briefly. Then I'm honored. And for what it's worth, I think she'd be proud of the father you're becoming. Not perfect, but real. Not fearless, but brave enough to be afraid and show up anyway. That night, walking home with Owen's hand in his, Marcus looked up at the stars and felt something he hadn't felt in 8 months.
Hey there, look at this.
Not closure. Grief doesn't work that way. But peace. The kind that comes from accepting that love and loss are two sides of the same coin, and both are worth holding on to. If this story touched you, please like this video, share your own experiences of healing in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for spending this time with Marcus, Owen, and Amara. May we all find the courage to let others witness our pain, and the grace to witness theirs in return.